Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the National Assembly of the Republic of Slovenia, Ms. Urška Klakočar-Zupančič, and the Chief Commissioner of the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption of the Republic of Slovenia, Mr. Robert Šumi. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues, good morning to you all, both here in person and those joining us via the live broadcast, and a warm welcome to the European Conference on Strengthening Public Integrity and Countering Undue Influence in Democracies. My name is Anja Kampuš, and I have the privilege of serving as your moderator for this significant event, which will unpack how governments can further strengthen integrity, what integrity means, what the challenges we are facing today are, and how the issues of undue influences are affecting democracies. As we commence this conference, I am honored to be in the company of distinguished speakers and international experts who are in the forefront of promoting transparency, integrity, accountability, and ethical governance in democracies across Europe and beyond. Our journey today begins with Mr. Robert Šumi, Chief Commissioner of the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption of the Republic of Slovenia and the esteemed host of this conference. We are also fortunate to have here with us Mr. Didier Migaud, President of the French High Authority for Transparency in Public Life and President of the European Network of Public Ethics, who plays a pivotal role in co-organizing this event alongside Mr. Šumi. Furthermore, I extend a warm welcome to Ms. Urška Klakočar-Zupančič, President of the National Assembly of the Republic of Slovenia, and Mrs. Valerija Jelen Kosi, State Secretary at the Ministry of Justice of the Republic of Slovenia. Their presence, representing both the legislative and executive branches, add a profound dimension of significance and commitment to our collective cause. Our keynote addresses from Ms. Delia Matilde Ferreira Rubio, Chair of Transparency International, Mr. Marin Mrčela, Greco President, and Mr. Julio Bacio Terracino, OECD Head of the Public Integrity Division, promise to enrich our understanding and guide our discussions towards actionable solutions. Their contribution to this event signifies their dedication to fostering a culture of transparency and countering the undue influence that threatens our democratic institutions. Following the enlightening keynote addresses, we will take a short coffee break, providing you with an opportunity to network, engage in discussions, and interact with our distinguished speakers. Subsequently, our esteemed keynote speakers will be joined by Mr. Šumi in a dynamic panel discussion titled Enhancing Integrity and Accountability. This panel will be moderated by Mrs. Vita Habjan-Barboric, Greco Bureau member, guiding us through an insightful exploration of these crucial topics. After the panel discussion, we will invite you to actively participate by asking questions, sharing your thoughts, and fostering an interactive dialogue. Last but not least, I wish to acknowledge the presence of our esteemed international and Slovenian guests. The Human Rights Ombudsman of the Republic of Slovenia, Mr. Peter Svetina. The State Attorney General of the Republic of Slovenia, Ms. Ana Kerševan. First Deputy President at the Court of Audit of the Republic of Slovenia, Ms. Maja Bilbija. State Secretary at the Ministry of Interior of the Republic of Slovenia, Ms. Helga Dobrin. And other representatives of Slovenian public and private sector, academia, civil society, as well representatives of diplomatic corps and foreign chambers of commerce in Slovenia, and also our colleagues and friends from 15 different European anti-corruption authorities and the Office of European Ombudsman. Your presence here today, and many of you online, is a testament to our shared commitment to advancing the fundamental principles that underpin our democratic systems. Without further ado, let us commence this important journey towards fostering transparency, accountability, and democratic values in our societies. I give the floor now to the host of today's event, Mr. Robert Schumi.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, today we gather here at the European Conference on Strengthening Public Integrity and Countering Undue Influence in Democracies to delve into the vital concept of integrity and its profound connection to trust. Indeed, trust forms the very bedrock upon which the rule of law and democratic governance stand. This conference stands as a testament to our shared commitment to nurture this essential interconnection and to address the critical issues surrounding integrity and its role in combating corruption. As we embark on this journey towards fortifying integrity and reducing undue influence, we recognize the challenges that lie ahead. Yet, we do so with unwavering determination and steadfast commitment. It's our duty as public servants to lead by example and ensuring that our actions align with the principles we champion. Our commitment extends beyond borders as we join hands with like-minded counterparts within the European Union. Together, united at the European level, we are resolute in our pursuit to amplify the forces of good while precluding those of bad. Last year, thanks to the initiative of the High Authority for Transparency in Public Life in France, we established the European Network for Public Ethics. This network is dedicated to fostering a culture of public integrity and harmonizing regulations across the EU member states. Tomorrow, we are honored to host the first official plenary session of the European Network for Public Ethics, and I express my gratitude to Mr. Didier Migaud, President of the French High Authority for Transparency in Public Life and President of the European Network for Public Ethics, for co-hosting the events and initiating the network. I also extend a warm welcome to the representatives from 15 ENPE member states and the Office of the European Ombudsman. The challenges ahead may be tough, but they can be overcome. By joining forces, sharing knowledge, and fostering international collaboration, we can create an environment where integrity thrives and trust flourishes. In the spirit of exchange and collaboration, we eagerly anticipate engaging in meaningful discussions that will undoubtedly deepen our understanding of these critical issues. As we embark on this journey of exploration and reflection, let us not lose sight of the ultimate goal: to fortify our democratic institutions, to ensure that they remain firm against the winds of undue influence, and to reaffirm our commitment to the citizens we are honored to serve. I wish you all a productive and insightful conference. Let us seize this opportunity to learn from one another, share best practices, and collectively work towards the betterment of our democratic societies. Together, we can ensure that ideals of transparency, accountability, and public integrity continue to light our path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schumi, for your warm welcome address. Your insights have set the tone for our conference. I'm delighted to invite our next distinguished guest to the stage, Mr. Didier Migaud. Mr. Migaud serves as the president of the French High Authority for Transparency in Public Life and holds the role of president of the European Network for Public Ethics. He will deliver his address in French, which will be followed by an English translation for all our attendees.
Madame la Présidente de l'Assemblée nationale, Madame la Ministre, Monsieur le Commissaire en chef, Mesdames et Messieurs les Présidentes et Présidents, Mesdames, Messieurs, je suis très heureux d'ouvrir, après Robert Soumy, cette conférence sur le renforcement de l'intégrité publique et la lutte contre l'influence indue dans les démocraties, qui plus est ici, dans cette très belle ville de Ljubljana. Je tiens à remercier Robert Soumy pour son accueil, ainsi que les membres de la Commission pour la prévention de la corruption slovène, qui œuvrent depuis plusieurs mois à l'organisation et la réussite de cette conférence. Et je veux m'excuser auprès de vous sur la très mauvaise qualité de mon anglais qui m'impose de m'exprimer devant vous en français.
Mr. President of the National Assembly, Mrs. President, Mrs. Minister, Mr. Chief Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to open this conference after Mr. Soumy, this conference on the strengthening of public integrity and fighting undue influence in democracies. Furthermore, here in this really beautiful city of Ljubljana. I want to thank Mr. Robert Soumy for hosting us, as well as the members of the Slovenian Commission for the Prevention of Corruption, who have been working for months on the organization of this conference, who I'm sure will be a success. And I also want to apologize for my poor English, because of which I need translation.
La lutte contre les ingérences étrangères est une préoccupation centrale de nos démocraties européennes, qui doivent se protéger contre les mécanismes d'influence occultes qui nuisent à la confiance des citoyens dans les institutions, remettent en cause la neutralité des responsables publics et érodent les fondations d'un débat public orienté vers l'intérêt général. L'approche des élections européennes de juin 2024 doit guider l'action publique vers un renforcement de la légitimité de nos institutions pour assurer la stabilité de notre démocratie européenne. Et la France soutient en ce sens le paquet défense de la démocratie proposé par la Commission européenne. En effet, des règles de transparence et de déontologie pour encadrer les relations entre les responsables publics et les représentants d'intérêts qui exercent une activité d'influence pour le compte de pays tiers doivent être mises en œuvre au niveau national et au niveau européen. Et c'est d'ailleurs la raison pour laquelle la haute autorité française a missionné l'OCDE, que je salue ici, pour identifier les lacunes existantes dans son cadre institutionnel et identifier les meilleures pratiques internationales dans la protection contre l'influence étrangère.
The fight against foreign interference is a central preoccupation for our European democracies, who have to protect themselves against the mechanisms of hidden influence that are harming the citizens' trust in our institutions, questioning the neutrality of public officials, and eroding the foundations of a public debate focused on public interests. As the European elections of June 2024 are getting closer, public action should focus on strengthening the legitimacy of our institutions in order to ensure the stability of our European democracy, which is why France is supporting the Defense of Democracy package proposed by the European Commission. Indeed, rules of transparency and deontology, setting guidelines for the relationships between public officials and lobbyists exerting influence on behalf of third countries, should be implemented at the national but also at the European level. Which is why the French High Authority has asked the OECD, whose delegate is here among us, and I greet him, to identify the shortcomings in our institutional framework and to identify the best international practices in protection against foreign influence.
Nous avons également revu en France les lignes directrices de notre registre des représentants d'intérêts afin de renforcer la transparence des activités d'influence des États étrangers. Les cabinets de conseil ou d'avocats, les organisations et fédérations professionnelles, les associations, groupes de sociétés doivent ainsi désormais déclarer si leurs activités, en tout ou partie, ont été menées pour le compte de tiers. Et ce registre est un outil à disposition des citoyens leur permettant de suivre le processus décisionnel en toute transparence. Nous devons continuer d'agir pour restaurer la confiance citoyenne, le contrôle des mobilités publiques-privées de nos responsables publics et le renforcement de leurs obligations déclaratives en matière de patrimoine et d'intérêt sont également des aspects importants du renforcement de cette confiance. Ainsi, lors de notre première réunion plénière à Zagreb en novembre 2022, le réseau européen d'éthique publique s'était réuni autour du thème des mobilités publiques-privées. Aujourd'hui et demain, notre réseau approfondira les réflexions menées sur les différents dispositifs européens en matière d'obligations déclaratives des responsables publics, avec pour ambition d'élaborer un standard minimum commun en la matière. Et il nous apparaît essentiel que cette action soit menée à l'échelle européenne et avec la coopération du plus grand nombre d'États membres. Et je salue à cet effet l'entrée récente du Portugal au sein du réseau européen d'éthique publique qui vient témoigner de la vivacité et de la pertinence de notre réseau. Le renforcement de l'intégrité publique ne doit pas être une action isolée sur le plan national, mais un mouvement d'ampleur européenne afin d'éviter les disparités de traitement et les risques associés à des initiatives purement nationales. C'est d'ailleurs l'un des objectifs de la proposition de directive relative à la lutte contre la corruption présentée par la Commission européenne le 3 mai dernier, qui inclut un volet préventif ambitieux, en tout cas beaucoup plus ambitieux qu'au départ. Les membres du réseau s'étaient en effet accordés sur une position commune appelant la Commission à inclure des mesures préventives dans le texte de la directive, considérant que seule une approche législative pouvait en garantir leur entière efficacité. Nous avons donc accueilli avec satisfaction les mesures prévues par la proposition de directive obligeant les États membres à adopter des règles efficaces pour la prévention des conflits d'intérêts dans le secteur public, des obligations de déclaration de patrimoine et à contrôler les mobilités entre secteur public et privé pour les responsables publics. Et l'annonce par la vice-présidente de la Commission européenne de la création d'un organe éthique européen, bien que limité pour l'instant, renforce également l'aspect préventif de la lutte contre la corruption et contribuera, nous l'espérons en tout cas, à construire une véritable culture de l'intégrité. Le réseau européen d'éthique publique peut se réjouir d'être associé à ces discussions, notamment dans le cadre du nouveau réseau de l'Union européenne de lutte contre la corruption, qui s'est réuni pour la première fois à Bruxelles le 20 septembre dernier et dont l'objectif est justement d'assurer une cohérence des politiques de lutte contre la corruption des États membres. En juillet 2023, nous avons adressé un courrier à la présidente de la Commission, Mme Ursula von der Leyen, qui a permis de réitérer notre volonté de coopération tout en prenant en compte la spécificité de notre réseau et en évitant les chevauchements entre nos deux réseaux. La prévention de la corruption est un axe essentiel de l'intégrité de la vie publique et de la pérennité de nos démocraties, que ce soit par un meilleur encadrement de l'influence étrangère, par le renforcement du contrôle des mobilités entre secteurs publics et privés ou encore par le développement des obligations déclaratives des responsables publics et leur publicité. Les actions menées par les autorités ici présentes sont les piliers d'une vie publique démocratique. Merci beaucoup pour votre engagement et votre présence. Encore une fois, toutes mes félicitations à nos collègues slovènes et je souhaite plein succès à nos travaux d'aujourd'hui. Merci.
The High Authority has also revised the guidelines of its registry of lobbyists in order to strengthen the transparency of the lobbying activities of foreign states. The consulting and law firms, the professional organizations and federations, the associations and corporate groups now have to declare if their activities, in full or in part, have been carried out on behalf of third parties. This registry is a tool that is at the disposal of the citizens, thus allowing them to follow the policy-making process in full transparency. We must continue acting in order to restore citizens' trust, controlling the revolving door phenomenon and strengthening the rules applying to the officials' disclosure obligations for their assets as well as for their interests are also significant aspects of the reinforcement of this confidence. Thus, For our first plenary meeting in Zagreb in November 2022, the European Network for Public Ethics had gathered around the subject of revolving doors. Today and tomorrow, our network will deepen its reflections about the various European instruments regarding the disclosure obligations of public officials, with the ambition of defining a minimum common standard in that matter. According to us, it is fundamental that this action should be taken at the European level, with the cooperation of the biggest number of member states. In this regard, I welcome Portugal recently joining the European Network for Public Ethics, which is testament to the liveliness and relevance of our network. The strengthening of public integrity should not be an isolated action at national level, but a vast European movement in order to avoid discrepancies in treatment and all the risks associated with purely national initiatives. This is precisely one of the objectives of the directive proposal on combating corruption presented by the European Commission on the 3rd of May, a proposal that includes an ambitious preventive component, at least more ambitious than what it used to be. The members of our network had indeed agreed on a common position calling for the Commission to include preventive measures in the directive's text, considering that a legislative approach was the only way to guarantee their full effectiveness. It is thus with great satisfaction that we welcomed the measures set by the proposal, obliging the member states to adopt efficient rules for the prevention of conflicts of interest in the public sector, as well as assets disclosure obligations, and to control the phenomenon of revolving doors for public officials. The announcement by the Vice President of the European Commission of the creation of an EU ethics body, even though limited for now, also strengthens the preventive aspect of combating corruption and contributes to building a true culture of integrity. The European Network for Public Ethics is extremely glad to be involved in these discussions, especially in the framework of the new EU Network Against Corruption that met for the first time in Brussels on the 20th of September, and whose goal is precisely to ensure a consistency of the anti-corruption policies of the member states. In July 2023, we sent a letter to the President of the European Commission, Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, which allowed us to reiterate our desire for cooperation while taking into account the specificity of our network and avoiding the overlapping between our two networks. The prevention of corruption is a fundamental axis for public affairs integrity and for the durability of our democracies, be it by a better ruling of foreign influence, by strengthening the control on revolving doors, or by developing disclosure obligations for public officials and their publication. The actions undertaken by the authorities present in this room are the pillars of democratic public life. Thank you for your involvement. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all our Slovenian colleagues for organizing this conference, and I wish us a great success in our works.
Thank you, Mr. Migo, for your warm welcome address. Your insights are greatly appreciated. Now it is with great pleasure that I invite our next distinguished guest to the stage to deliver the opening speech. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Valeria Jelen Kosi, State Secretary at the Ministry of Justice of the Republic of Slovenia. Her opening speech promises to provide invaluable insights, which will greatly enrich our discussions.
Dear colleagues, dear guests, it is a privilege to be among you today. Please allow me to first extend my minister's regards, best of wishes, and apologies for not being able to address you today. Fight against corruption and strengthening of public sector integrity is one of the priorities of Slovenian government. Corruption is one of the most difficult areas of crime to address, as it's often invisible, interwoven with different established social relations and practices, or it is difficult to detect and combat because of strong interest of everyone involved. At the same time, it undermines the trust of people in the government and different sectors of economy and harms the whole society financially and in general. For this reason, it is not enough to address corruption solely through criminal law, but to build strong preventive measures as well, including firm control mechanisms in different decision-making processes, especially in public sector, and control the distribution and spending of public funds. Strengthening of integrity and prevention of corruption is a cornerstone of the Slovenian Commission for the Prevention of Corruption as an independent public body. Thanks so much to the Commission for all your work and for the hosting for this important event. The recent changes of the law on integrity and prevention of corruption in 2020 complemented the already existing legal framework in the areas of conflict of interest, asset declaration, lobbying, and public availability of data of the use of the public funds in the application error, among other things. Raising awarenesses of the negative impact of corruption on citizens and our societies to address corruption risks before they emerge or deepen and stimulate a culture of integrity is crucial. The law on protection of whistleblowers that was adopted early this year impacts more than 2,300 private and public organizations that are now obliged to create reporting mechanisms and protect whistleblowers. This process will have an important awareness-raising effect. An important aspect in fighting corruption is also efficient freezing, seizing, and confiscation of property, including unexplained wealth. In Slovenia, we have legal basis for proceedings aimed at confiscated assets of illicit origin. Still, many practical issues remain, especially with regard to tracing such assets that are formally owned by other persons or other entities or hidden in tax havens. We expect that the legal framework will be importantly strengthened on the basis of the EU confiscation directive that is currently being negotiated. The directive is in the phase of trilogues before it is too early to discuss its final solutions. I also welcome the European Commission's proposal for a new anti-corruption directive. This new criminal law instrument aims at extending the definition of criminal offenses beyond the classic bribery offenses to also include, for example, misappropriation, trading in influence, abuse of functions, as well as obstruction of justice and illicit enrichment related to corruption offenses. The proposal aims to introduce minimal criminal penalties and sanctions and extend the statute of limitation to prosecute corruption, among others. An important part of the new legislation is dedicated to the preventive measures. Slovenia will actively participate in negotiations in the Council to ensure added value and coherence of new provisions with existing international standards set by the United Nations and the Council of Europe. There is no universal answer to the challenges of corruption. We will probably never be able to eliminate the capacity and will of people in power to abuse their positions, nor the attempts of others to gain unjustified benefits through such abuse. But I'm sure that setting the role model by politicians and high public officials and by cooperation among different stakeholders should be part of the solution. Solution that will justify the public trust in public office and that will support the rule of law. Last but not least, The involvement of civil society is of the highest importance in these discussions and building of improved framework, as well as in raising public awareness on the topic. Today's event is one of the important steps in these endeavors. I wish everyone a productive and illuminating debate. Thank you once again, and good day to all.
We extend our gratitude to Mrs. Jelen Kosi for her illuminating opening speech. Your insights have added significant depth to our discussions today. In addition to Mrs. Jelen Kosi, we have now the distinct honor of welcoming Ms. Urška Klakočar-Zupančič, President of the National Assembly of the Republic of Slovenia, to our gathering today. Please.
Esteemed CPC President, Mr. Schumi, Mr. Migaud, unfortunately, the Minister of Justice is not here today, so I'm welcoming the State Secretary, Mrs. Jelen Kosi, and distinguished guests. Allow me to start by thanking you for inviting me to speak at today's event, organized by the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption, whose role as an independent state body has become increasingly visible, with the CPC being recognized as an important partner in helping improve public integrity and in the fight against undue influence in Slovenian society. The consistent application of the principle of legality, professional and responsible behavior, and making morally correct decisions by officials and public employees strengthen the sense of security and personal trust in the public sector among people. When this kind of principled action embodying a high level of integrity is exercised by every individual, not just leaders, statesmen and officials, it leads to state bodies and institutions producing higher quality work. Above all, it strengthens people's trust in the work of these institutions and bodies. Public integrity is therefore one of the cornerstones of a stable social system, especially because we live in times marked by multi-faced and complex global social challenges, including those related to the development of social networks. By generating a flood of information, these networks cause people to pay less attention, while the lightning speed and availability of information can be misused to manipulate the truth and abuse trust in the service of private interests. In this way, powerful, rich individuals and interest groups, both at home and abroad, can unduly influence the actors of leading politicians and officials, and even public opinion. Some of these campaigns to influence society and leading politicians with the aim of favoring private interests can be linked to Cambridge Analytica. Their actions are supposed to have even influenced the outcomes of elections around the world, which in turn can ultimately lead to the misuse of public funds for the private benefit of a minority instead of the welfare of everyone. These events should serve as a stark reminder of the importance of strengthening public integrity and the fight against undue influence in democratic systems, where every individual has the right and opportunity to participate in socially important decisions, and where the dignity, rights, and freedoms of every citizen are respected. The moment civil servants or officials, either elected or appointed, give priority to partial or private interests over the needs of the wider population, be it as a result of their own decisions or undue influence, they begin to undermine the essence of the idea that these representatives of the people are responsible to their citizens and voters. When public institutions or individuals succumb to the undue influence of corrupt practices, their actions trigger the erosion of public integrity, which in turn undermines the rule of law as a whole. An example of foreign influence on the democratic processes of the European Union is the Qatargate affair, a political scandal in which officials and members of the European Parliament were allegedly unduly influenced by the governments of Qatar and Morocco. The scandal also implicated one of the vice presidents of the European Parliament, despite the extremely high salaries in this EU institution. The public and institutional integrity of the European Parliament was only saved thanks to the quick, decisive and unified response of the EU Parliament, which adopted the decision to remove the Vice President with 625 voters in favour and one vote against. This sent a clear message to the world that the European Union institutions remain firm and united in their actions and, most importantly, preserve the high level of people's trust in EU institutions. Slovenia, unfortunately, cannot boast such high percentages of trust, since past governments were tainted by an arbitrary interpretation of the rule of law and the responsible trampling of fundamental human rights, resulting in a significant loss of public trust in the long run. With each new election, institutions strive to restore their credibility, and a significant milestone attained by the National Assembly on this path is undoubtedly the adoption of the 2020 Code of Ethics for Deputies, an achievement that can also partially be attributed to the years of calls and recommendations made by the CPC. The Code of Ethics not only set the standards for protecting the public integrity of the National Assembly, but also sent a message to the public that their democratically elected representatives can transcend political divisions and distinguish between what is right and what is wrong, between ethical and unethical practices, and that violations will be appropriately sanctioned, hopefully. However, merely adopting the Code of Ethics is not enough. It also needs to be respected and put into practice, which has not yet fully been. After leading the current term of the National Assembly for over a year, I can confidently say that the level of ethical culture and the integrity of the deputies have significantly improved. Ladies and gentlemen, everyday efforts and events like the one today are of utmost importance when it comes to shining a light on preserving public integrity, as well as for protecting the very foundations of democracy in which our society stands. Allow me to conclude by quoting the timeless wisdom of Martin Luther King Jr. The time is always right to do what is right. Thank you for your attention. I wish you all a productive debate. Thank you.
I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Ms. Klakočar Zupančić for her enlightening opening speech. Her instrumental role in shaping legislative policies and upholding democratic values is indeed deeply appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me once again in thanking Ms. Klakočar Zupančić and Mrs. Jelen Kosi, as they have to both leave today's event due to other obligations. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my distinct pleasure to invite our first keynote speaker to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Delia Ferreira Rubio, Chair of Transparency International, the leading global anti-corruption organization with the Secretariat in Berlin and national chapters in more than 100 countries, including Slovenia.
Thank you very much for organizing this very important conference, and thank you for the creation of the network. I think this is really a step forward in the fight against corruption, because it is collective action, and for that we need cooperation and coordination. And I have to recognize that this movement from you, the agencies and commissions against corruption, is very important. It's not the first one. The Pacific anti-corruption commissions had long ago created this kind of network and collective harmonization of the work. So thank you very much for that idea, and I wish you all success in what you have in front of you. And thank you for having civil society here in this conference, because as we say, this is the work of the whole society. So all actors are important in the fight against corruption. You, the commissions, cannot do this alone. You need public sector, private sector, but also individual citizens and civil society organizations. And strengthening integrity in all sectors of society is not just a mere exercise. It is key to guarantee the effectiveness and the capacity of democracies to really deliver on the promises. One of the factors that impacts the lack of trust in institutions, particularly political institutions, is the impossibility of some democracies to deliver on the promises that democracy means for citizens. But it is also key to rebuild trust, not only trust in the institutions, trust among citizens. And this is a very challenging moment, as we will see in a moment, in terms of building trust or rebuilding trust. And also, strengthening integrity is key for, of course, preventing, detecting, and sanctioning corruption. Corruption has become, in these last 30 years, transparency is this year celebrating its 30th anniversary, corruption has become more sophisticated, not invisible, as the president of the assembly said, but opaque, which is not the same, more complex. We have new actors participating in corrupt deals, particularly very important because they change the nature of the consequences of corruption, the participation of organized crime in corruption. And we also see that the phenomenon has become transborder. 30 years ago, corruption was a synonym of bribery, local, national. It has nothing to do with the foreign world. But globalization, with all its positive things, means also a change in terms of corruption. And grand corruption appears as one central phenomenon that it is very much difficult to tackle and detect and prevent than the ordinary bribery within the limits of a country. Nowadays, with the new geopolitical scenario that we are facing, we are seeing another new type of corruption, a very dangerous one, which is strategic corruption. Corruption used by certain countries, particularly kleptocratic countries or authoritarian countries, used to influence policy and economy around the world. And this strategic, very powerful corruption is, of course, like a new animal in the zoo of corruption, which challenges all of us to really be prepared to face the new characteristics of these criminal activities. There is not a single characteristic of democracy that it is not affected by corruption. Think of representative democracy. Can you answer the question who the representatives are representing really? Are they representing us, the voters, the electors, or are they representing the interest of those who finance their campaigns? Think about equality. Are we really equal in context of corruption, where clientelism, nepotism, or simply the buying of public policies is the rule? Do we have the same access, all citizens, or there are some privileged undue influencers? Think about common good. Democracy is the government for the common good. Are public policies oriented to the public good, really? Or are they the way in which we give back favors that politicians receive beforehand in the campaigns or in the creation of a political career? Are elections really fair and competitive when there is corruption, not only in public or private financing of the campaign, but in the whole scenario of deep fake influence from foreign countries, the troll armies that are influencing elections? But the costs of corruption are not only measured in financial terms or in terms of billions or trillions. The money that is lost to corruption is the money that is missing in education, health, infrastructure, sustainability, in terms of the future of our population. And also, corruption costs lives, and this is not just a narrative. Think about the Beirut blast, for instance. It destroys neighbors of the city. Lot of people were damaged, harmed, lose their homes, or were killed. And corruption was in the basis. There had been for 30 or 20 years someone signing the certificates to certify that everything was okay. It was visible, but it was opaque. And corruption was at the center of the problem. And it cost life. Think about the Turkey earthquake. It is measured and studied that even natural disasters are much more harmful in contexts of corruption. Have a look at what happened with the urbanization, legislation, and regulation in the Turkey. And corruption was there, at the center of the problem. And we all see what happened. And I can keep on giving examples. Think about the fires in the textile factories in Bangladesh many years ago. Everything was perfect. All certificates were signed. Safety was guaranteed. Thousands of people, workers, died in those fires because of corruption. But corruption is a global problem. The money that is lost to corruption in the global south, where I come from, in Argentina, or in Africa, in Latin America, the money lost there to corruption ends in the city of London, in the real estate industry in New York, in the art market in Switzerland, in the luxury industry in France. Those countries that perform very well in our corruption perception index are enablers of corruption in a way. And not only the countries, the authorities, but also many professionals that really change the nature of their activity from being gatekeepers for integrity to becoming enablers of corruption. That's why coordinated efforts are important. That's why the Global North has a responsibility in the fight against corruption. But we can have all the laws and we can create all the organizations and commissions and hopefully give those commissions the independence, the resources, the authority to do their work, and even have no guarantee of success in the fight against corruption. Because to guarantee that success, we need really to create a culture of integrity, not only in the public sector, not only in the private sector, but across the whole society. And to create that culture of integrity, we have to reconstruct the somewhat broken social basic consensus on what's right and what's wrong, what will be tolerated and what's not being tolerated, what have to be done and what should be avoided. And this consensus is the foundation for the success and long-lasting success in the fight against corruption. What we have to do is to integrate integrity. Integrity is not only the responsibility of you, the anti-corruption commissions, or the anti-corruption NGOs. We have to integrate integrity across all sectors of government, all sectors and functions within the corporate world. We have to integrate integrity in schools, and I celebrate that the Commission is doing a great work on education. In a society that values integrity and acts accordingly, there is no place for abuse of power. In a society that respects integrity, there is no space for undue influence. In a society that respects the values of integrity, there is no space for impunity. And this is central because the culture of integrity is the culture of the consequences. There are consequences, and no impunity is one central piece in that consequence. Creating a culture of integrity is not the result of a decree or a law, and pledges are not enough. Narrative are not enough. Speeches are not enough. We need to commit to integrity. And to rebuild trust, we need to restore the value of truth. And probably this is the most challenging task we face nowadays. In a time of alternative truth, in a time of fake news, in a time of deep fakes, which only enlarge and strengthen and make more worrying the lack of trust. Think about deep fake used in political campaigns. Who will trust what? We live in an era of disinformation and misinformation and manipulation of the information. And that generates a great problem with truth and with the possibility to restore trust. But to recover the value of truth, in order to get trust, we need transparency. And transparency is, as a movement against corruption, is not just information. Transparency is integrity. That's why to restore trust, we need truth, and for that, we need transparency. Let's work together to rebuild trust and better our democracies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ferreira Rubio, for your invaluable insights. As you pointed out, strengthening public integrity is essential for preventing corruption, achieved through rules, standards, and practices that address conflict of interests, uphold the rule of law, safeguard public resources, and combat undue influence in public decision-making. However, it takes two to engage in corruption, highlighting the need for both the public and private sectors to adhere to integrity standards. Cultivating culture of integrity within society requires collective action, involving all sectors and individuals to play their part. Our next keynote speaker represents GRECO. GRECO stands for Group of States Against Corruption, and it is a subsidiary body of the Council of Europe. GRECO's primary mission is to monitor and promote anti-corruption efforts among its member states. Therefore, we have invited President of GRECO and a Justice of the Supreme Court of Croatia, Mr. Marin Mrčela, to explain how their organization is addressing these critical concerns and working towards a more transparent and accountable governance across member states.
Good morning. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy and honored to be with you today. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you especially to Mr. Šumi, who is, by the way, one of the GRECO best evaluators in our procedure. So we will use you more. So why the integrity is so important and why we are talking about integrity today? I would say there are mainly two reasons for that. First one is reassure citizens that officials are working in the public interest and that they are honest, or at least that they look like honest. And the second, integrity builds a culture that is resilient to corruption. In Council of Europe, a fight against corruption is high on the agenda for already 30 years. Despite of that, despite of all the standards that we developed, despite the monitoring body, corruption continues to pose a serious threat to the rule of law and human rights in the member states. GRECO, a group of states against corruption, was established as the anti-corruption monitoring body in the Council of Europe in 1999. Today, we have 48 countries, 48 members. Kazakhstan is one of them, and the United States of America is one of the GRECO members, which gives a particular flavor to our work. We become, I would say, a multilateral forum for reform and a recognized anti-corruption sentinel. We are a regional monitoring body, but with a global reach. We neither are a political body, nor we are motivated with the political reasons. And that is the reason why authorities sometimes do not like what we say. Our role is monitoring and encouraging with the recommendations to the countries to commit to the strong fight against corruption. We do not measure corruption, nor we deal with the concrete cases. We have fact-finding process, and we issue recommendations based on the facts and according to the professional standards. Currently, we are in the 5th evaluation round, which deals with the central government, including persons with the top executive functions, and with the law enforcement agency. We are still in the compliance procedure under the 4th evaluation round, which was, the topic was corruption prevention regarding the parliamentarians, judges, and the prosecutors. So fighting corruption does not necessarily require highly innovative solutions. More or less everything is known. An effective fight against corruption really starts and stops with the political will. What does it mean? It means not only words, but also deeds. Politicians need to lead with integrity examples, and we know that is not always the case. To tackle corruption effectively, member states should guarantee at least 3 aspects. One is the independence of judiciary, the second one is the transparency, and the third one is accountability. Let me say a couple of words about all those 3. Independence of the judiciary should be guaranteed. We had our team for the monitoring launched in evaluation round in 2012, deals with the corruption prevention regarding the members of the parliament, judges and the prosecutors. And if you want to draw one conclusion from all our 48 reports is this one: there can be no real effective fight against corruption without a truly independent judiciary. At the time when we in Europe thought that the principle of judicial independence was clearly established, we, Greco, find and identified serious problems with respect to judicial independence and weaknesses in the structures separating the 3 branches of powers. Dependent judiciary undermines the rights for a fair trial. It compromises public confidence in the state institutions and the rule of law. Moreover, a prosecution service whose independence is incomplete or under the threat may struggle or be reluctant to investigate alleged cases of corruption. Judges without independence is less likely to fairly adjudicate and impose effective, dissuasive, and proportionate sanctions. This is why the Greco has been clear in the respect judicial independence that must be recognized and guaranteed by all branches of the power, and there should be no any undue influence over the judiciary. The independence of the judiciary should be, as a constitutional principle, translated into practice. For that purpose, we consider that vesting independent self-governing bodies of the judiciary with the key decision-making role on the recruitment, career and discipline of judges is an appropriate method for guaranteeing the independence of judiciary. It is essential that judicial councils, where they exist, of course, are not only free, but also seen to be free for political influence. That is why the composition of its governing bodies is important. A number of countries receives recommendations from Greco to get rid of the members of executive power in judicial councils. Second point is transparency, and the reason is that we must expose corruption so there is nowhere to hide. And this is my second point, which leads to the access to the information issue, which we also cover in our monitoring work. Government entities, and these are some of the conclusions that I would like to share with you. So government entities are often reluctant to disclose information and prefer to apply exceptions, enabling them to withhold all or parts of the information requested. In addition, the application of laws on freedom of access to information is too often inconsistent across government entities, which shows the need for the training, which is our standard recommendation, I would say. Any exception to the rule of public disclosure should be limited to a minimum and be thoroughly justified. Any limitation of the right of access to official documents must be necessary in democratic society, proportionate, and only applied if there is not an overriding interest or disclosure. Here I must underscore the importance of involving key stakeholders and more broadly civil society in the civil corruption policy and decision-making process. Moreover, the role of independent media is crucial, as we often refer to them as the watchdog of democracies. We know that the dog do not bite the hand that feeds him, though. right? But truly independent and professional journalists are skilled in using the tools available, such as Freedom of Information Acts, to obtain information that can be analyzed and to report it on. Revelations by investigative journalists, such as money laundering revelation from the Open Looks and Pandora Papers investigations, have been key in bringing the information into the public domain. This demonstrates once again the importance of access to information and the freedom of information law, which helps fight corruption by uncovering corrupt behavior and increasing accountability. That brings me to my third point, which means that the transparency without accountability is like a coin with only one side, or a sword with one blade. It amounts to impunity, which only aggravates the risk of corruption and undermines public trust. Even the best rules will remain weak if they are not complemented by effective supervision and enforcement mechanism. Some countries refer to political responsibility in the form of naming and shaming as the most effective sanction. Some politicians are saying that they should only answer to citizens in the course of elections. So this is like a political responsibility. Greco does not consider that this is enough. We called for the development of additional controls and sanctions to ensure that ethical misconduct is detected, addressed, even without media scrutiny or public or political pressure. That's it why we issued recommendations, for example, to strengthen public integrity bodies and equip law enforcement with the proper means to conduct inquiries and investigations. In some instances, Greco has encouraged law enforcement to be more proactive in dealing with the suspected offenses by the top executives and start investigation on the basis of reasonable suspicion rather than irrefutable evidence. Immunity should not result in impunity. Immunity should be limited to the extent necessary in democratic society so as to not hamper the investigation, prosecution, and education of the corrupt offenses. We notably recommended limiting the privileges enjoyed by the top executive with respect to prosecution for acts performed outside of their official capacity and has stressed the importance of objective and fair criteria for lifting immunities. All those involved in the Greco knows that too many people in Europe still face corruption as they go about their daily lives. Too many citizens have to put up with the corruption scandals involving those in position of national trust. Responsible leaders will understand that in such circumstances, it is not easy to build and maintain confidence in system, institutions, and decision makers, but that is work that must be done. Greco will continue to strive to help ensure the highest standards of integrity in our member states by putting in place oversight mechanism, independent and effective judiciaries, and monitoring by the media and by the civil society. All these measures have to be accompanied by the clear commitment to preventing and fighting corruption, starting from the top, preferably in the form of national anti-corruption strategy, which is implemented and which includes anti-corruption policies at the level of each institution. Really, all public bodies should rely on a message of zero tolerance. And managers have to lead by examples to ensure that the culture of integrity takes root. And we must not forget the main weapon, or if you want, the main tool in the fight against corruption, and that is people. We need professional and honest people with integrity. Without them, even the best rules of standards are toothless tiger. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mrčela, for your valuable insights and highlighting that we can see changes only by drawing attention to corruption risks and concrete ways of mitigating them and of countering misconduct. Public integrity and countering undue influence are core issues in Greco's monitoring. This is vital when it comes to fighting corruption and promoting integrity in central government and law enforcement, the two categories targeted in Greco's ongoing 5th round. Last but not least, we have the privilege of hearing from Mr. Julio Bacio-Terracino, head of the Public Integrity Division at OECD, who will offer his thoughts on enhancing public integrity and countering undue influence.
So last, yes, just before the coffee. So first of all, Mr. Sumi, Monsieur Migaud, Delia, Marin, colleagues, friends, some of you, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for joining this conference today in Ljubljana. It's my first time in Ljubljana. I'd like to thank the European Conference. I'd like to thank the European Network for the Public Ethics and Commission for the Prevention of Corruption of the Republic of Slovenia for the invitation. You may be wondering, what is the OECD? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is an international organization that works to build better public policies for better lives. This is our motto. Together with governments, policymakers, and citizens, we work on establishing evidence-based international standards and finding solutions to a range of social, economic, and environmental challenges. From improving economic performance and creating jobs, to fostering strong education and fighting international tax evasion, we provide a unique forum and knowledge hub for data and analysis, best practice sharing, and advice on public policies and international standard setting. One of our areas of work is anti-corruption and integrity, because, as I'm sure you will agree, there can be no economic and social prosperity without integrity. When there is corruption, the government delivers the wrong policies. It is as simple as that. Or let me rephrase something similar that Delia has said. When there is corruption, the government delivers the right policies to a very selective group of people and the wrong policies to the rest. This means poor health, bad education, weak economy, high criminality, etc., etc. No wonder we see record low levels of trust in government in many countries. In 2022, at the OECD, we conducted a survey on trust among 22 OECD countries, and almost half of the respondents believed that politicians in their country were corrupt. Let me repeat, half of the population in 22 OECD countries believe that their politicians are corrupt. This is alarming, especially when combined with other data that we have collected at the OECD through the public integrity indicators. So allow me to share with you some of these data. Within the broad area of anti-corruption and public integrity, I would like to focus today on one key issue, which is the way different interests influence the government. At the end of the day, this is at the core of citizens' discontent and lack of trust. Those that represent us in government, who do they really represent? As also Delia mentioned before. Those that influence and lobby government still have privileged access in many countries. And to make things worse, there is a greater range of actors seeking to influence policymaking through a range of vehicles, including trade and industry associations, NGOs, advisory and expert groups, parliamentary liaison groups, academic institutions, and even think tanks. There is little transparency on the way these actors interact and influence the government. And only 12 OECD countries have established an authority, an entity, a body, to oversee these issues, transparency and integrity in lobbying and influence. One key way of influencing the government is through the financing of political campaigns. But less than half of OECD countries ban anonymous contributions to political parties or contributions from foreign actors. So while we can all agree that donations to political campaigns and political parties are a healthy expression of democracy, but when these are anonymous, there is no way to know who is behind a candidate or supporting a political party. Not getting the rules right on political finance can skew the democratic process towards the select few, leave countries vulnerable to foreign interference, and harm the public interest. Another area of high concern is conflict of interests. When there is a conflict between the public duty and the private interests of a public official, in which the public official has a private or personal interests which could improperly influence the performance of his or her duties. While most OECD countries have strong conflict of interest regulations which define incompatibilities, the circumstances and relationships that can lead to a conflict of interest situation and provide institutional responses, the rules are not always implemented. For example, more than half of OECD countries that require members of parliament to submit interest declarations do not track whether they do, in fact, submit these declarations. And in many countries, indeed, nobody's checking. And moreover, most OECD countries are not actually those that do track whether they are submitted. They then do not verify these interest declarations. Only 12 OECD countries had verified at least 60% of the declarations made in the previous 2 years. Another example, only 9 OECD countries collect data on the frequency in which ministers leave government to work in a company in the same field of his or her portfolio. So even if there are rules, you may know the cooling off period rules, sometimes there's no tracking of whether this is respected. And I invite you actually to look at the OECD data online, in which you can, in some countries, you can even see which ministers have gone to the companies that belong to their portfolio before. But I feel I'm giving you a headache here with all these data, numbers, and percentages, so I will not continue. You can find much more of this online in the OECD Public Integrity Indicators portal. All this data is down. You can download it and use it for your own work and your own research. But not everything is bad news. We do see a lot of action and a momentum that we have never seen before. The OECD indicators show that 79% of OECD countries currently have a strategic framework or a strategy on public integrity. And I believe Slovenia is soon to join this already high percentage of countries. So more and more, and having this strategic approach to anti-corruption and to reinforcing public integrity. A strategy for public integrity is essential for supporting a coherent and comprehensive integrity system. And this is a positive development and shows that governments are increasingly thinking in a holistic way, bringing all key actors in government in a more coordinated approach to fight corruption and strengthen integrity. Another positive development is the rise of technology and data analytics as a powerful tool to carry out many of the integrity functions, but much faster and better than ever before. At the OECD, we support our communities of anti-corruption and oversight bodies, like yourselves, to advance their digital strategies and strengthen their use of technology, data, and analytics, mainly in 3 ways. First, advancing the digital reforms within anti-corruption and oversight bodies to ensure a high-functioning data ecosystem. Also co-creating tools and advanced risk models for uncovering risks of corruption in specific areas, including public procurement, infrastructure, and public grants. And by building networks and learning opportunities, including a community of practice for policymakers and practitioners, which is focused on technologies and analytics for public integrity. So, for example, we know, and we're working with the Tribunal de Contas, this is the Accounts Tribunal, if the right translation perhaps, of Portugal, the Supreme Institution of Portugal, in advancing its digital transformation strategy and developing a data-driven risk model for assessing irregularities in public procurement. Or the Federal Internal Audit of Belgium is incorporating data analytics and including artificial intelligence into the risk assessment processes. So we have a more strategic approach, we have new technologies, but the most important good news of all is the renewed commitment from many actors, from governments, from business and civil society. At the end of the day, this is why we are all here today. It's people like you, like us, who are really making change happen. And the stakes, I think, couldn't be higher. What is at stake here is much more than a bribe and a public contract that went to the wrong hands. Last year, the OECD launched the Reinforcing Democracy Initiative to support countries in strengthening trust in government and reinforce democracy. And our work on anti-corruption and integrity is a fundamental part of this initiative. It includes promoting integrity in democratic institutions and amongst elected officials, in particular by strengthening government integrity systems and increasing the transparency of political parties and election campaigns. This work will continue to be informed by our standards on public integrity, by our own work, as well as the indicators I mentioned earlier. But OECD countries have also prioritized strengthening democratic resilience to foreign interference and undue influence from abroad. So integrity risks are magnified when foreign governments, particularly non-democratic regimes, aim to destabilize democracies. Disinformation campaigns, malign political financing, and interference in domestic policymaking through covert lobbying practices can all contribute to weakening social cohesion. By spurring perceptions that democracies are dysfunctional, that democracies are corrupt and untrustworthy, malign foreign actors can set the stage for increased support for non-democratic forms of government. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Scientific cooperation, diasporas, education, universities, culture, think tanks, civil society organizations, corporations, these are some of the areas and actors that have become easy targets for foreign covert influence operations. And this is, of course, very worrying, especially if globally the number of countries classified as democracies is diminishing. 70% of the global population, that's 5.4 billion people, now live in closed or electoral autocracies. So only 30% of the global population live under democracy. This is why OECD countries committed to building resilience to foreign interference as part of their public integrity efforts. This effort will require a whole-of-government approach to improve our understanding of the institutional architecture of foreign interference activities and how to strengthen our response across a range of measures that autocratic states use to interfere in democratic processes. And one of the pioneers in this field is the French High Authority for Transparency in Public Life, who are here today, and it was mentioned earlier, who are already working with us to strengthen the institutional and legislative framework on foreign influence. So the stakes are indeed high. Democracies aim to represent and safeguard the public interest. Democratic governance has proved to be the best system, institutional system for protecting and promoting individual rights and freedoms, while allowing long-term sustainable gains and well-being. Your work in strengthening anti-corruption and integrity systems directly contributes to this, no more and no less. You're not alone. You have a network of partners, and even here and beyond, I dare say, supporting each other to fight the good fight, and you can definitely count on the OECD for support as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Terracino. We fully agree with you and OECD that integrity is one of the pillars of political economic and social structures, and thus essential to economic and social well-being and prosperity of individuals and societies as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, before we commence, it is now the perfect moment to enjoy a rejuvenating coffee break. Coffee and refreshments are awaiting you in the foyer, one floor below. This break not only provides for an excellent chance for networking, exchanging ideas, and capturing memorable moments through photos and press statements, but also serves as a delightful refreshment before we continue with our panel discussion. I welcome you back at 11:30.
In the next hour, we will explore what is integrity and why is it relevant for prevention of corruption. How are public integrity and public trust correlated? What roles do international and national anti-corruption bodies play in the fight against corruption? And how and whether NGOs and the private sector can assist them in this fight against corruption. Hopefully we will also hear some good initiatives and good practices that we can all learn from. And let me start with you, Mr. Šumi. Before we start, of course, we have to understand what we are talking about when we talk about integrity. This is the main word here today during this conference. It seems that the notion of integrity is sometimes difficult to grasp onto, at least by some of the people. So I would like to ask you, what is integrity and why is strengthening integrity so important for preventing corruption?
Yes. One of the simplest explanations of integrity is that it's accordance between what one thinks, believes, speaks, how she behaves. So it's very simple to see one person if he's in accordance with himself. So if we believe that our politicians and leaders and all persons at the okay, yeah. If persons at the positions have trust, then of course we believe in their actions. We check them through daily actions if they are with highest level of integrity. What's important, we trust them. So integrity is a precondition of trust. So that's the important message. If we then combine integrity with corruption, so we can see that it's a so-called immunity shield against corruption. And when we have persons with honor, persons who we trust at the positions, everything goes better. And therefore, we believe that society has to start at the beginning with kids and so on, but we'll speak about it later on.
Thank you. So, in short, if you say that you have the integrity, you need also to walk the talk, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Ms. Ferreira Rubio, for decades we have international anti-corruption legal framework in place, which provides us for various rules related to criminalizing corrupt practices, preventing conflict of interest, gifts giving and taking, and that call upon the countries to integrate these anti-corruption tools into their national legal and institutional framework. And actually the countries have done so, right? We have all, on the other hand, been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We see wars around the world and even in the neighboring countries. The climate change has affected almost every country in the world, we can say. It hasn't spared us. Governments are required to work in this context of multiple crises. And for this, it seems that they are not properly equipped for. Corruption scandals related to emergency situations show that even in such urgent situations, top-level public officials seem to forget about their pledges to demonstrate their integrity when they are in office. And the OECD Trust Survey show that on average, only 4 out of 10 people in OECD member states expressed confidence in their governments. So despite constantly emphasizing efforts that have been made to strengthen integrity among top public office holders, the public seems to be unconvinced. Ms. Ferreira-Rubio, what in your opinion should be done that the trust of the public is rebuilt?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much. And of course, there are lots of surveys that show, not only the OECD survey on trust, that people don't trust in politicians in particular and public institutions. And this has to do, of course, with the scandals. In order to build reputation and trust, it takes a long time, but it is enough to have one scandal to destroy that confidence of the people. So that's one thing that we have to take into account. And you mentioned, Bita, the COVID emergency. And around the world, even in the very well-established and old democracies in the northern countries, we had lots of scandals from day one related to public procurement for the response to COVID. The conflicts of interest that we have seen researched and revealed from Transparency International and the chapters is immense. And then we have another thing that was not so visible in the years before, which is that corruption is not only spending wrongly the public resources, but also not being consistent in how you behave. And what we saw were the party gates. You remember the Downing Street 10, but we have these kinds of parties in many democracies. So those who impose on us the restrictions don't apply the restrictions for themselves. And that was really something very visible because we were in our homes, secluded, while we see the pictures and the films and the videos. So that was enraging people, creating outrage. And the other thing that came in a succession was the problems with vaccination. Both the contracts about buying the vaccines and the lack of transparency there, and the access to vaccine, the privilege access. So we have lots of things to do in order to rebuild trust. A strong public integrity system. You mentioned some things, but rules and laws are not enough. You have to lead by example. You have to show. And you have to guarantee that there are consequences. So if you don't comply, if you know, as a public official, you do not abide by the laws, you will be punished. In an appropriate time, not 20 years after you left office. So punishment and the stop of impunity should be concurrent with the violation of the rules. That will give a message to the public. And of course, we have to work on education, and we will have time to talk about that. Private sector integrity also. We have to work with the private sector. This is a tango. You need two to tango. And you have to create the incentives for public officials to act properly, but also to work with the private sector. And there are many persons in the private sector around the world that I have met in my activity willing to collaborate. So it's a collective action way of working, and we can improve the situation. And once we have all this in place, probably if we keep on behaving properly, we will restore trust.
So, Mr. Basio Terracino, For decades, various international anti-corruption mechanisms strive to ensure that obligations that are set in the international legal framework against corruption, which states have agreed to, are met. However, it seems that those mechanisms are sometimes toothless. And traditional responses to fighting corruption based on creating even more rules, overly rigid compliance regimes, and the tougher enforcement seem to have been of limited effectiveness. And the new topic now on the agenda is the public integrity and how to cultivate it across the whole of society. Strengthening public integrity is recognized now as a strategic and sustainable approach to corruption. Also, the focus regarding public integrity strategies have been changed, shifting it from ad hoc integrity policies to a context-dependent, behavioral, risk-based approach. So, Mr. Basio Terracino, what are the reasons for the states failing to comply with international obligations, and what more should be done to revive pledges that they have given to the public and the people?
Thank you. This is a very interesting question to ask me, and perhaps also Greco and other mechanisms that for decades are doing this work. Perhaps on the fact, I would agree that many of these mechanisms could be considered toothless, but we should remember why. At the end of the day, is the way the world works, I would say, is based on state sovereignty. So every country is sovereign and doesn't want to be told by another country what they need to do. So I'm oversimplifying, but this is the principle behind the system. We have the global system. Therefore, these mechanisms are, they don't bite as much as we would think. But even if you have, and here I'm thinking of, forget about the area of corruption, even other areas like genocide or crimes against humanity, we do have a court that is bites quite a lot, and still there we could discuss about the effectiveness of it. So I think there's a real and physical, perhaps even limitation on how much we can do internationally, or how much pressure internationally can be put on a country to do what they should do. However, I would say these mechanisms sometimes do produce change. I admit they are perhaps slow and not even, so change quickly and then suddenly stops. And one of the success comes from the OECD Working Group on Bribery, which is we have this body that was created 25 years ago, next year, and it has changed the way we do business, at least in some parts of the world, not in the whole world. But it has changed the way we approach bribes, international bribes, and trade, etc. Not the full solution, I admit it, but it has served to criminalize things that we were not criminalizing before, etc. I admit, too slow, much slower than what we want and what citizens may want. But I would just say that the real change and the long-term and more structural comes from within. It cannot come from outside, it cannot come from abroad, and from within it means many things. It means civil society, to have the civic space, to have a vibrant civil society, but also from within, and especially, I would say, from people like you, from people from entities or government that individually, as a person, you want to do the right thing for your country and for your government. I think we usually forget about these people. They are the ones, and yourselves, that push this agenda against a lot of obstacles that are put in front of you, I'm sure, every day. This is the real change that will not come now. And with this, I finish going back to the international mechanisms. The international mechanisms can support these people through networks, through organizations like the OECD, the UN, and others that will help with tools, with sharing experiences, or even moral support when your job is just too tough.
Thank you. It's interesting to say that, yes, it comes from within, not from the international organization and such, but there should be the political will in the top level public officials who have to respond to calls made upon them by the international bodies. Mr. Marcella, being a Greco member state brings certain obligations to be met. But after monitoring how successful Greco's member states are in implementing its recommendations to strengthen corruption prevention and integrity among top-level public officials, Greco had to call upon several member states, even the ones with high CPI, to step up in the fight against corruption. However, reactions from these states, from these top-level public officials in the recent years have not been always what we expected. Even more, they sometimes went quite the opposite direction towards seriously eroding the standards of the Council of Europe in protection of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Why, in your opinion, do we encounter such responses to Greco calls coming from the top-level public officials?
How much time do I have for this? Well, as I said, we have 48 member states. There are 48 different members of the top executive functions. Some of them are, you know, very bright, willing to do something. Some of them are not. Both of them. Both sides, you know. So, but as Americans would say, let's cut the chase. Everything depends on the political will, and everything depends whether people would like to make a change or not. The people from the countries who are very high on the corruption perception, some of the countries, not all of them, some of the countries, I would say 2 of them, but I will not mention who they are. Because I think naming and shaming is not. They think that they are the best. You know, we are the happiest nation in the world. We don't have to change anything. So we will not introduce the rules that you are recommending to us because we don't need that. All the others introduce that, but not that country, specific one. They don't want to introduce that because it's, by the way, it's an OECD country. So we don't need that. So despite of the, and now you have to have in mind how this attitude is reflected to the other countries. For instance, that country received regularly 4 or 5 recommendations. And the other countries received 30, right? So the other country is, you know, implementing 20 recommendations, still 10 pending, and we still think they are not good. But that country is, you know, partly implementing 3, 1 is not implementing, and 1 is implementing. And then this is good result. Of course, it's a not good result. And that comes to that issue of the leading by example. We need examples which are good, like, for instance, Iceland and Norway. You know, what they say. When we discuss the report, they say, okay, we don't think that this recommendation is needed for us because we have to, you know, the practice that is good, but we understand that the Greco's rule is you need the black letter law and you need the practice. So we will implement that. Finland, for instance, when we have transparency of political party funding, they didn't have any rules about that when we started. They received, I think, 13 and 14 recommendations for Finland, which is, you know, almost outrage. They implement everything in the 13 months. No question asked. You know, other country for the same region received less, but they are reluctant because their system is functioning. So it's a, you know, it's a, the main challenge is how to persuade people in the top executive functions that what they are doing is not for them, but because of the people. And the people can trust them only if they behave in a such way to deserve trust. Okay, I'll stop here because I will have some more time later on, right?
I think that Greco's work is also very useful beyond Europe. And you mentioned something in that way in your presentation, Marin, and I want to highlight that because we do not receive recommendations, but we read the recommendations. And you have a very interesting thing, which is monitoring the implementation of the recommendation, which is lacking officially in UNCAC, for instance, the anti-corruption. We have in the Americas a mechanism for our Americas anti-corruption treaty. But this monitoring is good because you come to the countries, ask the questions, and then says, okay, we have been told this is partially complete or not. And the rest of the world interested in creating a culture of integrity, we are following the recommendations. So beyond the non-compliance or the very good countries that don't need you to recommend anything, the other countries of the world are using your work. So thank you for that.
May I just thank you for that. I really appreciate that because, you know, when I'm speaking to Greco, it often sounds like I'm bragging, which of course someone will say you are entitled because you have a good results. But our results are in our reports, which is, as I mentioned, fact-based report, regardless of the political situation in that country. And therefore, I'm really urging, if you want to do the survey, you will have a factual situation in each country of 48 member states of the Greco. Our website is open, our reports are open, we are following the compliance procedure, we are peer pressuring the countries to do that, we are even have an ad hoc procedure if something is really not good, and we have a high-level visit to the country. And if I may just, you know, we have two high-level visits, which I was there, to talk to the people how to implement the recommendations. So we went to the OECD member state with the happiest people in the world. We have the conversation with the ministers, with there, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Then we have a high-level visit in Cyprus because the Supreme Court in Cyprus was reluctant to introduce the code of ethics, right? So I went there with the executive secretary, and the executive secretary, who is not executive secretary anymore, but that's not because of that, he said, Marin, you should talk with them because you are a judge. They will listen to you. So he went out of the room, and I talked to them, all 7 of them, and we find the agreement very fast. Actually, the solution how to do that, you know? And that was, this is one of the issues that, and one of the, I would say, thing that I'm very happy and I'm very proud of that. I didn't have to persuade them, you know? We just talked like colleagues, which I cannot do with the Ministry of the Justice because he's a, you know, I cannot do it with the President of the Parliament. You know, in Croatia, we still didn't, our parliamentarians do not have a code of conduct. Like this is a nuclear science, right? The recommendations is 10 years old. And I really don't see why. I mean, well, it's not about behaving into the, you know, parliament. It could be, but it's not. It's actually a conflict of interest, what to do in the specific situations. What if you come to Slovenia and someone offers you a lunch? how you will respond to that, what you will do, what with the protocolatorial gifts, what is not. What about the lobbyists? You know, we will talk about that probably, you know, with the people who try to influence. Why do I have to report that I have a meeting with the president of the electricity company? Why? Why? I am a member of the parliament. I don't have to report to anyone anything. Wrong. You are not there because you are so important and so powerful. You are there because you are elected to serve your country or to serve the voters. That's the message that, you know, should be repeated as a parrot, you know, every day. But the people, as soon as you get power, people changed, right? And that is the issue. That's why we need what I said, you know, training and education. Education about corruption starts in the kindergarten and in the family. This is what I'm always saying, so I had to say it again.
Thank you. That brings us actually back to the political will that you mentioned in your speech and also at the beginning. And the political will is not something that you need only to comply with integrity standards. It's also needed to set up appropriate legal and institutional framework. And one of the UNCAC requirements is to have in place anti-corruption body or bodies that are in charge of preventive measures and policies. And this body should be granted sufficient independence to ensure that it can do its job unimpeded by undue influences and should be provided with adequate resourcing and training. And we have the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption in Slovenia, going soon to be 20 years old next year. So it has almost 20 years of experience in the fight against corruption, and its central role, due to its position, powers, and recognized expertise in the Slovenian system of prevention of corruption, has been highlighted several times, even by international anti-corruption monitoring bodies. However, despite its role in cultivating the culture of integrity and ensuring accountability of public officials, such bodies sometimes face difficulties. They face attempts from people in power to weaken them or even to shut them down. Mr. Šumi, what measures can be taken to ensure that the independence and effectiveness of anti-corruption bodies in democracies are striving?
It's not enough just to have prescribed by the law that we have independent agency. What's more important is how it goes in reality, and first of all, it's very important that you have guaranteed independent funding, so that you're not depending, but at the end you are depending to the parliament who gives you money. And it puts you in an unpleasant situation when you have to each year ask for the money you need for your work. So at first I would like to stress independent funding. The second is independent workforce. It's very important that you are in position to appoint or to promote by your own decision, not by political or some other influence. What else? It's very important that you have a clear legal framework without gaps. And we considered it in Slovenia that we have some gaps, and they needed to be addressed by the change of law. But it's another question. And last but not least, it's very important what we see day by day, that everything what we do, all our decisions and all our recommendations, they needed to be by government and by state authorities taken seriously. It's very hard to send one by another recommendation and you have no answer. And what we'd like to do is that we
puts in that it would be in law as obligation that each and every recommendation has to be applied in some way, so that if you refuse, for example, if you reject, you need to provide proper reasoning. So I believe that this is the most important pillars which guarantee that independent state body, as anti-corruption agency in Slovenia can work efficiently.
Thank you. So when the top level officials say, well, we have the political will, we will support you, but at the same time, in practice, they don't do so, it actually is again a question of integrity.
It's the same as Marin explained, it's as well a matter of culture. So if you have such kind of agency, it's a question, do you have it because you need it or because you have to have it? And I'm afraid that we do not have an answer yet in our society.
And one important point is to get the support of civil society.
It's very important.
Because I have seen around the world many occasions where the executive, particularly comes from the executive, is trying to cut off, to stop, to destroy the work or even the commission itself. And it is civil society that comes in support, in defending the commission. Of course, in order to get that, you have to have a reputable commission with independence and a good record and a good reputation. But this contact with civil society, I had found in very concrete situations, and I will not mention countries, as you say, where it was civil society taking on the streets to defend anti-corruption commissions.
Yes, and besides civil society, media as well are very important. And in 20 years of existence, we have some issues with what you mentioned, yes. Yeah.
Ms. Ferreira-Rubio, it seems that you are looking at my notes because you were a little bit ahead with your comment. What I wanted to mention now is partnering with stakeholders outside of government. This should also be recognized as an essential element of taking an evidence-based, holistic and global approach to anti-corruption. And this is something also that UNCAC specifically mentions, right? Civil society organizations, NGOs, and community-based organizations should be given an opportunity to actively participate in the prevention of and in the fight against corruption and to raise public awareness about this phenomenon. However, at the same time, then we are facing individuals and activists who investigate and expose corruption and who suffer, even by being killed. We see NGOs who are obstructed in their endeavors to obtain information in order that they provide informed and independent opinions about government's performance in anti-corruption and strengthening integrity. So what are the most common challenges faced by civil society organizations in promoting public integrity, and how can these challenges be overcome?
Mm-hmm. In the moment, what we are very worried about around the world as a global trend is the shrinking civil space, or the shrinking space for every civic or citizen activity. Organized civil society or just citizens. Through what? Through the passing of legislation that restricts the possibilities of working, through the attacks of very elementary rights in terms of democracy, like the freedom of speech and expression, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of association. There are some laws that are being popularized through authoritarian or elected authoritarian regimes trying to restrict the possibility of action of civil society or the possibility to receive resources to do our work. So this shrinking space for civil society is really worrying and concerning. The second thing that we are seeing, apart from the individual attacks, and as you mentioned, some activists or journalists working with us, we as Transparency International work together with the consortium of investigative journalists and with the OCCRP on organized crime. So we are very close with the investigative journalists as partners, and they are being attacked very seriously. We have had many cases of people dead because the investigations they were doing on corruption cases. But apart from that individual attacks, what we are facing now repeatedly is the appearance of SLAPs. SLAPs are strategic lawsuits against public participation. And they are, so you say something, you mention a company in a report on, for instance, it happened with the vaccines, the COVID vaccines, and who allows us to know or answer the access to information petition and who not. And we immediately face someone very powerful, particularly in the UK, for instance, with jurisdiction around the world, trying to initiate a defamation case. And for a civil society organization or a single individual, you can imagine what that means. So that's very costly, of course, and also in terms of facing the future of being in court for a long time on this. So these SLAPs that are becoming very popular are one problem that we should try to solve, and probably some legislation would be helpful in that sense. And the other thing that we face problems with is the access to information, which is a very simple and very original ask from Transparency International and other civil society organizations. Information should be public by default. And in some cases and some countries, we are still in the position where we have to present a paper, sign, explaining why we want this or that. And we were talking before about the decision of the Justice Court of Europe, which was really a slap on our faces, saying that the information about beneficial ownership is privacy, and you do not have a right to access that. Well, that came from the very top judiciary of the European Union and was against access to information. So I think the solutions are very simple. Respect the rights, allowed for the participation of civil society and citizens in general, and be transparent and accountable, as Marin mentioned in his speech.
Mr. Murchela, you actually, yes, in your speech, you actually mentioned that fighting corruption does not necessarily require highly innovative solutions. However, it requires constant political commitment, a shared culture of integrity, transparency, and accountability. Greco, as the Council of Europe's anti-corruption monitoring body, has limited tools at hand to enforce its recommendations. So what role does Greco play in assessing and monitoring the integrity of public institutions in democracies, and what are the main challenges faced in this regard?
As you know, we are covering 48 member states. There are 48 different systems. Trying not to repeat the political will, but you know, when you, we have, I would say, in a broader sense, three types of the recommendations. One is a hard one, another one is a mild one, and the third one is something in between. 13 countries, Greco members changed the constitution because of the Greco recommendations. So imagine how hard is that. That is very hard. On the other hand, you have the recommendation, do the training and the awareness issues, which is, you know, although I would like to be on the training of the ministers and the prime ministers and the government when they're doing training on the conflict of interest, you know, or the gifts. Yeah, well, if you know the place, you know that someone will. So these are so-called light ones, right? But when we are doing our assessment, we encounter different systems and the situations that you or I could not even imagine that would happen. And that's why the things are, you know, important, and the people who are sitting there are professionals. And they will listen to the others, how that situation is solved in the other country. That's why I said you don't have to invent the hot water again. It's already there. You have to have just, you know, research and adapt the system that it has. However, there are some, I would say 3 examples, if I may say, regarding the judiciary that stuns me, you know. If you divide Europe in half, from north to, you know, to the south, on the left side, I intentionally didn't have say on the west side. On the left side, you have a countries when the people, when the judges can be members of political party. Okay, they do not interact. On the right side, for the obvious reasons, there are rules you don't have. You are banned from you know. And then you encounter the country where the judge can be simultaneously a member of parliament. Right? Okay, it never happened 50 years, but it is in the law. So, of course, we issue the recommendations. It's the Netherlands. And, of course, they will immediately dare to change it's a long process, right? That needs a time. You have to persuade parliamentarians why that is not good, although all the judges know why is that not good. But it's a process. Another example is where the judges are elected in the parliament. And when they are elected in the parliament, they have to pay a fee to the political party who voted for them. So what do you say about that system? How do you like it? Can you imagine that in Slovenia? Poland? Croatia? And that is Switzerland. And of course, Switzerland is confederacy. And they have this system of direct democracy. And everything needs to be put on the referendum, right? That's why the woman gained the right to vote in 1974 in Switzerland. So, and it's very hard to do that. And then you have 2 states where the judge can be simultaneously a mayor of the city. So imagine you are judging Kranj and mayor of Ptuj. Italy and Austria. That is a possibility there. So we issued the recommendation, of course. I said one of the countries changed that and fulfilled the recommendation, and another one did not yet. So try to guess which one implemented, just to see whether your minds are working as a prejudice. Italy fulfilled the recommendation, but Austria did not yet, I would say. Because of the consultations, because of the parliamentarians, because of the how you will present, you know, that Austria belongs to the, they are a strong supporter of the main German rule principle, I would say, which says trust is okay, but control is even better, right? Which I think is actually a good principle for integrity, right? I think we should all apply that. We should trust them on the first side, but there is a need for the checks and balances. That's why, because some parliamentarians do not understand why do they need to fulfill the declaration of assets or declaration of interest. And what is actually the difference between the declaration of assets and the declaration of interest, right? If I fulfill the declaration of assets that I have 25 acres of land, can I vote in the parliament when they are introducing that bill? But if my wife have a share of Coca-Cola, am I allowed to vote on a bill that will give the right for Coca-Cola to build a... So that's why you need all that. That's why you need the training. And sorry for taking time.
Thank you. And you brought us to the next topic, undue influence, Mr. Basio Terracino. One of the threats to public integrity is undue influence exerted on the decision makers in the decision-making process, or having monopoly of the influence. And this has proven to be even more the case in times when the governments have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought about unprecedented challenges of existing democracies, concentration of power, derogation of rights and freedoms, and large amounts of money being infused in the national economies to recover. In the aftermath of the pandemic, OECD issued a report, Lobbying in the 21st Century, Transparency, Integrity and Access, by which it noted that lobbying has been part of democracies for at least 2 centuries, and reaffirmed that it is a legitimate way to influence and inform governments. However, it carries risk of undue influence. And new evidence regularly emerges showing that the abuse of lobbying and other influence practices is blocking progress in many public policy areas. Studies increasingly show that lobbying and other influence practices conducted without transparency and integrity and without the involvement of a broad group of stakeholders has led to misallocation of public resources, reduced productivity, and perpetuated social inequalities. So what are the key policy areas that governments should prioritize to effectively address undue influence and corruption in their public institutions?
Thank you. I'll start perhaps by saying that lobbying as we think it happens, it doesn't happen anymore. If we think of perhaps these movies, American, most of them, in which you have a man, usually with a briefcase, going to see a parliamentarian or talk or influence in that way, I think that's over. It doesn't happen like that. And that's why in our work we keep the word lobbying so everybody knows what we're talking about, but we added the word influence, which is much broader. And in this report that we produced, yes, I think already 2 years ago, one of the things is that the conclusion we reached was, okay, it's much more complex than it used to be. And we see, for example, the increased use of social media. So lobbying through or with social media as a lobbying tool, especially to shape policy debates, inform or persuade members of the public to put pressure on policymakers. So this is something we didn't, I mean, we saw it before. Sometimes when we talk, I always think, well, this is marketing. It exists for a long time, in which companies had a marketing department to basically influence people to buy their products. So the same is now applied to influence people to put pressure on government. And this is activities that are, of course, not captured by lobbying regulations. We have many types of regulations. Some countries have adopted very, very strict and very narrow with definitions of lobbying, so it doesn't include any of the things I've mentioned. So, of course, there we have little transparency of what's really happening. So we have, and many countries have nothing, actually. So 22 countries in the OECD have adopted some form of transparency mechanism through lobbying registries or open agendas or legislative footprint, but only Canada and the EU cover in their legal framework what we call lobbying through grassroots movements and social media campaigns when used as a lobbying tool. And if you wonder, well, how is this useful? So if you did not were convinced before, something that was interesting is in Canada, when there was the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, it was in the only country that you could really see almost live who was influencing the different policies that the government was taking, because they have such a good lobbying system, which is updated regularly because it covers grassroots movements and social media. So if you look at the report, if you ever bored and have time, look at the report from the COVID time, and you will see that it's very, you could see this, and the media and the civil society used it a lot because it was almost live what you saw. So first, what we need is to cover these gaps, these loopholes in the regulations in countries, and understand influence in this broader way, also through financing and using think tanks and grassroots movements. So something that is perhaps in Europe happens a little bit, used to happen a little bit less, but now we see it a lot, and it was used for a long time in the United States, is companies that fund what we think are grassroots movements. So Mothers for, an organization called Mothers for Better Milk and Babies. And actually behind you have a company that produces milk and funds this type of movement. So all this, there's a tendency to provide transparency around this, but much more is needed. The second point I would say is the issue of beneficial owners. So even if we have transparency on who is influencing policy-making processes, the name of a legal entity may not reveal who's really the beneficial owner. So there is a call for, when we talk about transparency of lobbying, also adding the beneficial ownership issue in this discussion. And the third, and I will be quick here because I already mentioned this, is the issue of foreign interests and countries. So I've already mentioned before the risks, and I think they're obvious, but we see it a lot. And actually very few countries have mechanisms to address this, such as maybe you know it, which is called the FARA, is the US Foreign Agents Registration Act, which requires a registration of persons and entities with an agency relationship with foreign governments who are engaged in influence activities inside the United States. There as well, you would think it's a registry. It has been quite successful. If you look, actually, all this information is online. You can look at the reports they produce, and actually they prosecute a lot of people based on this law and the registry. So it's of course, it doesn't cover everything, but it's, I would say, quite successful. And as you may know, the EU is now exploring creating a similar system for all European countries. And last point, other policy solutions would be strengthening the rules on the financing of political parties, the screening of investments, foreign investment, contracts, the purchase of technologies, the ownership of media, guidelines on protecting universities and civil society from foreign interference. So there's a lot of actions that need to be taken in order to provide more transparency and integrity in the way that foreign interests influence our policymaking.
Without mistaking real foreign agents with local civil society, because that's the risk that we are seeing with the draft regulation or recommendation on directive of the EU. So please don't go in the Russian style of political agencies regulation in Europe. I really hope that you don't go that way.
And you brought me to the next question to you, Ms. Ferreira-Rubio. Actually, what I wanted to say is that the TI has observed in its 2022 CPI that undue influence is a threat to Western Europe and the EU countries. And you announced at the beginning of this year, nearly a third of countries in the region hit historically low scores this year. And you referred to various scandals in various countries and the undue influence, also foreign influence that was found there, how politicians from other countries and private sector was able to influence the policies and policymakers. So can you share examples of successful anti-corruption initiatives or campaigns that have effectively countered undue influence in democracies?
There are plenty, because there are lots of things done in the positive side, as Julio mentioned in his speech. I would say that the use of integrity pacts, which is a tool that incorporates in every public procurement a third party that will raise the red flag if necessary, if the anti-corruption rules involved in the procurement are not complied with. So integrity pacts are being used in Europe. Many of our chapters have been involved, and they are successful. They were created, in fact, in Latin America in the 90s to participate in public procurement where we have lots of corruption. And we managed to intervene in some of these cases with success. So that would be one tool. The other tool has to do with the use of new technologies, which we have already mentioned. So digitalization of information that facilitates access to information. The use of new technologies to manage the risk reports or to discover patterns of possible suspicious activity. For that, we have now tools not to delegate the decision-making to the tools. That's what I call the algocracy. We will end being government by algorithms, and that's a great, awful future, so we have to stop that. But use technology to discover these patterns of wrong activity that allows the Commission or the authority to put their lens there. The use of technology for digital contracting or open contracting, and also for beneficial ownership transparency. And the interoperability of the registers and the digitalized tools across country. Because it's not enough to compile all the asset declaration and interest declarations and put them together and say, yeah, complete, without verifying and without crossing the information. For instance, with the tax authorities, a public official that says, I am only receiving my salary. But then they are traveling around Marbella and buying Rolex for the wife in the best of the cases. and that has nothing to do with what they report to the Commission or to the tax authorities or what the anti-money laundering office in the country has discovered or is looking at suspicious activity. So let's make the registers interoperable. And of course, I would add that you have to also work with the private sector. Again, that's important. And in particular, in the private sector, what is the trend now has to do with ESG investment and ESG reporting, and with the movement that goes from regulatory compliance to integrity, integrated on in all functions of the corporate activity. So showing that integrity is good for business, for a balanced playing field, a level playing field in a country and beyond. So I think there are examples that show that we can be successful. It takes time. It needs for anti-corruption fighters, whether in the public sector, private sector, or in civil society, patience and perseverance. It's a long run.
Thank you. Mr. Szumi, what strategies can be employed to raise public awareness about the importance of public integrity and citizen participation in countering corruption?
we can find long-term strategies and as well short-term, but I will describe on short only the one we started in 2020 in cooperation with Slovenian National Education Institute. It's so-called Integrity Generations Common Goal. So we started it as a pilot project, and now after 3 years we can say that it's already prepared to put in place in school system on their own, of course. We just help them as partners. What's the most important message? Already we discussed about it, that we have to start with kids, so with pupils. We might not reach families, maybe via media or maybe via our prevention activities in general, but we can go to the kindergarten, or maybe the system can put integrity at the right place already in kindergarten. Of course, not with definition of integrity, it's very hard to understand for kids. But it needs to be systematically delivered since the beginning, so kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools, and it's the most efficient prevention. But we cannot expect results overnight. So it takes not just years, it takes maybe 1-2 generations, but it's never too late. You have to start. So this is the most important long-term project. And as well, I can say the cooperation with not just media, private sector as well, but to cooperate with private sector is so-called it can be understood as a provocation on the one side. It's like a double-edged sword, so you can receive then complaints or approvals, on the other side criticism. And who do not understand that in fighting against corruption or prevention or preventing corruptions, we are all together. They can say that why do you need to cooperate with private sector, because they are one who offer bribes and so on. But I believe that we have to continue our work, because together we are stronger, and together, not just internationally, nationally, but as well internationally, we are even more efficient. But why? Not just because of feeling inside of the institutions, but because of the message we then give with such kind of event as today to decision makers as well. That it's not just Commission in Slovenia, but who's fighting or preventing corruption, but here's a whole system on board.
Thank you. Allow me to finish this discussion here. I think we have taken more time than we actually allocated to this panel. I thank you for this lively discussion. And I think we still have some time for questions from the audience. So I would like you, in case you have any question, if you could please tell your name and also whom you're posing the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Ana Kerševan. I'm the State Attorney General in Slovenia. First, compliments to the organizers and the CPC for this event. I think topics like this are never exhausted, and I wish more members of the executive branch would have been in the room with us today. I have a question, or maybe half comment for all of you or some of you. And namely, how important, in your view, is the legislative and systemic stability of independent institutions that safeguard public interest and that work towards preventing corruptive behavior, such as we've heard, it's the independent judiciary, it's the CPC, it's the prosecution, and in Slovenia also the State Attorney's Office, because we stand in the way of many private interests. And the tricky thing is that legislative process, in principle, it's a legal one, it's a democratic one, but it can be misused or even abused in a way that it creates a very unstable and confusing environment in which these independent institutions operate, and it can also exhaust them financially. So this also happened to the State Attorney's Office in Slovenia a few years ago. The law was changed quickly without any explanation. It tied us closely to the will of the executive branch, and a few years ago we were actually forced to file slap suits. And we're now fighting towards legislative changes to change that, but the political will is not there. And I'm afraid the politicians are not aware of the link between the legislative framework and its stability and the corruptive risks.
I think they are aware. Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's
I'm afraid
why.
so, yeah. Thank you, that's my question.
Maybe I'll just, I think you touched on two very big issues. One is the issue of the independence. So, and even your very early comment, I mostly work with governments, the executive, but also with entities like the Commission, fully independent, there are different degrees of independence. I think we will all agree you need both. You need the independent institutions, of course. They are part of the republic and the democracy. But as you said, if the others are not in the room, we are talking from outside, let's say. So I always say we must pierce this and go and work with, which I do regularly, is with the executive. If not, then little is achieved from outside, sort of from this very strong point of view of independence. So when you manage to break this, sort of the independence, but working with executive, that's the best result. But the second issue is the legislative power, which is, in my view, long overdue, working with them and on their own integrity. There's much less work done, at least from us. I know Greco has covered it, but one of the many rounds, we work much less with them, although trying, on the way their own integrity, their own anti-corruption, because we have the separation of powers. It's very difficult, but in some countries this was taken to an extreme that there's no control, there's no even basic standards on integrity and anti-corruption in the legislative power, which may lead to easy adoption of laws in one direction or in another. So for me, there is this need, very, very urgent, and we're working on this at the OECD, to bring in the legislative power also into this discussion. So I was happy to see that we had here today a representative from them, so they are also aware and do their part as well.
Also, what Anna mentioned is very common around the world. You create the independent agency, and then you really stop them delivering by not giving the resources, as Robert mentioned, or not giving the proper authority to perform the work that it is supposed to be doing. So I will tell you an anecdote. Central America country. Many years ago, I went there not as Transparency International, but as a consultant working for an international organization in order to evaluate the the anti-corruption public prosecutor office, independent. So I arrived, I asked for a meeting, and the answer was, yes, we can meet at the coffee shop in the shopping mall. Well, okay, it was morning, shopping mall, no risks, so I went. And we start talking. Imagine how many years ago there were no mobile phones. It was the other mobile phones, but with a cable there. So from time to time, we were talking, and someone from the coffee shop came and said, Mr. So-and-so, you have a telephone call. So, give the phone. This man answered.
The third time I say, why don't we go to your office? And the answer was, we can go if you want. It is in this building upstairs, but I have no telephone, no secretariat, and no internet. So this, the owner of the coffee shop is so committed in the fight against corruption that he allows me to use the internet of the coffee to investigate corruption. So I work here, and the people help me. Do you think that having the law with all the rules was enough in that situation? No, but normally, not in the case of Greco evaluations, I know, you tend to be a checkbox list clicking exercise. So a law, yes. Independent authority, yes. Budget in the general budget, yes. And that's it. And it's not working in practice. So when we evaluate, we do the two things, the jure and de facto evaluation. And the gap, I can assure you, is amazing. So we have to put that in the highlights and to work to bridge the gap between what the law says and the practice of anti-corruption.
Thank you. Maroš Paulini, Slovakia Civil Service Council. My question is about the cooperation and the relations toward, I would say, another group of actors who are also in the business of evaluating state capacity to keep on their promise. And the group of actors are financial markets and rating agencies who also evaluate the capacity of democracy and the rule of law. And from history, we know that it was money who made Charles I in England convene the first parliament, and also in France, French Revolution, the dire need of money. So my question would be how to harmonize our standards with the financial market and the rating agencies so that our findings and the opinion of our experts holds an additional sway on the governments. Thank you. The question is to whoever is up to it.
The first answer would be talk with them. You have to be in contact. And that's what, for instance, we are doing at the World Economic Forum Anti-Corruption Group or Initiative, the PACI team, working with or working on ESG reporting and rating agencies and investors to help us in the fight against corruption in terms of not only combining the expectations and what they are measuring, but also working together in the solutions. Because this measuring trend or this reporting is trying to drown companies because there are so many different things to report that instead of working for integrity, many companies should work for reporting. So they have become a reporting agency, in fact, answering to 1, 2, 3, 4 different investors, agencies, tax, etc. So the first thing is, let's come, let's work together, let's hear and coordinate. The only way in which we will succeed in the fight against corruption is coordination and cooperation. It's collective action. And collective action is not just a narrative or a politically correct word. It is more than a word. It is the commitment to work together and the capacity not to have prejudice against other actors. Of course, I accept the criminal actors, but with the other actors in society, we have to talk and to hear and to listen, because sometimes we go into this dialogue or cooperation, but with closed ears. So we have the meetings, everybody says what they wanted to say, and then the ones who have the power to make the decisions go their way without listening. So we have to listen, and this goes also for the invitation to civil society to participate, or citizens to participate. It's not just opening a website where you can express your opinions on a draft law. I don't know whether you have this kind of mechanism here. But if nobody reads what the people is saying, and nobody analyzes the possibility to introduce that, which is listening to the other one, it will be very difficult to go in collective action.
And then, thank you. Actually, I mean, I've heard this before. Maybe it was you, Maros, that mentioned it. But the rating agencies and financial markets, I think it's a great. I will look into it. I've heard it before, and I think it's time to do it correctly. My only concern is what is the standard that they use to measure, evaluate these things. And then we all work in this field, so we know that's very difficult. But we are, with you, which you also know, if with the OECD public integrity indicators, we are starting to do that. And actually, they are now going, as of this month, we start working with 70 countries in the world. So we're really going beyond the OECD countries with an attempt to have some uniform data now across the world, I would say, which is similar, not exactly the same as a rating agency, but I think it's a good idea to explore. I think you're right about that. There could be a really good incentive.
We do have one question from our online audience, and it is intended for Mr. Szumi. It goes, what kind of incentives could be set for our leaders to play by the rules, being compliant, high integrity, code of ethics, and so on? Now, very local reference. If we recall our last scandal at Ministry for Work and Mrs. Ajanović-Honig, our Ministry for Interior Affairs, I apologize for public office not resigning since she thinks she did everything right. Although, on the other hand, we, the citizens, ask ourselves what for 10 million will do good to our lives. We have new additional taxes on our income, no doctors on primary level, and so on and so on.
Unfortunately, I cannot comment open cases we have in front of our commission. But generally speaking, I can say that, first of all, we would like to have adults in brackets in the political environment. So it means that they can recognize the level of responsibility, accountability, and that they understand what does integrity stands for, that it's not just a political message which is very appropriate in front in the period of election, but when you do your job, you have to be responsible. And when you are a responsible person with integrity, you know when you do mistake. When you do mistake, you have to apologize, or you have to leave the post. So it's the best prevention mechanism, but it goes top to down. So it goes with the form of leading by example. So everyone looks up to his own or her own leader, how he behaves, and so on. So what's important is what culture is present in society. We do our best. I believe that our mission is important, that what we do on with recommendations, with principal opinions, with education, with whatever we do, we are the message, we are the messengers in society, that integrity, trust, responsibility, accountability are very important.
Thank you for this conference. It's really, really have impact, and I heard a lot of things which I didn't know before. But I have a concrete question for President Dr. Szumi. I would like to ask, do we have any prevention how we will stop nepotism in the public sector? Thank you.
Do you mean in Slovenia or in general? In Slovenia. How much time do we have?
Maybe you can have a new conference on this topic.
On nepotism. Yes. It's very hard. It's very hard to explain Slovenian culture because there is excuse present in daily debate that we know each other very well, that we are a small country, that we cannot avoid conflict of interest, and so on and so on. But at the Commission, we do not believe in these excuses. So we believe that you are grown enough, that you know what does society expects from you when you are at the position, when you are, for example, just public employee, not need to be at the top of the chain. You need to behave first of all that you serve to society, not to your own benefit. So it means that what we need to learn at the beginning is that we have to separate as public servants private benefits from public good, so that this conflict of interest isn't present day by day. That's our common goal, our first, for example, social responsible approach, that we need to go out of ourselves, that we need to take care for others is at the first place. Maybe with such kind of approach, with education, with raising awarenesses that we have only one state, only one public sector, that private interest is of course important, but not, you cannot mix it while you're working, while you're doing your job. So it's very hard to answer on short.
Hello, yes. No more technical problems. I will have to stop all of you here, also the audience. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for joining us here. Thank you for answering questions. I had some at hand still, but maybe next time. And now let me give the floor to Mr. Šumi. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as we draw this European Conference on strengthening public integrity and countering undue influence in democracies to a close, I want to express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for your active participation available at the site, especially for you guests. I also want to extend my gratitude to our distinguished speakers again, because it's my note, who enriched our understanding and guided our discussions toward actionable solutions. Your presence here today has also reaffirmed our collective commitment to strengthening public integrity and countering undue influence in democracies. During our discussions, we explored critical topics such as the independence and effectiveness of anti-corruption bodies in democracies and strategies for raising public awarenesses about the importance of public integrity. We pointed out that financial autonomy, an independent workforce, a strong legal framework, and an active engagement with all stakeholders are crucial elements in ensuring the effectiveness of anti-corruption efforts. Furthermore, we have recognized that the fight against corruption and the promotion of integrity extend beyond governmental institutions. Engaging all stakeholders, including civil society, businesses, and the media, is imperative for effective corruption prevention. The synergy among these stakeholders is key to reinforcing public integrity and curbing the undue influence of corrupt practices. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the dedicated organizing team who worked tirelessly to ensure the success of this event. I wish you all continued success in your endeavors, and I look forward to future collaborations and discussions that will further strengthen our efforts to combat corruption and uphold the values of democracy. Thank you once again for your participation.
Thank you, Mr. Schumi, esteemed panelists, dear Vita. Once again, I thank each one of you for being a part of this conference and for your dedication to advancing public integrity and countering undue influence in democracies. Dear guests, let us embrace this platform to share knowledge, forge connections, and build a better future together. Thank you, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon.